The story you're about to hear will make you question everything you think you know about the people closest to you and the lengths grief can drive someone to go. The basement door creaked at exactly 12:03 a.m., just like it had every night for the past 4 months. Melissa Turner pressed herself against the kitchen wall, her breath catching as she watched her husband David's silhouette disappear down the wooden steps. The soft yellow glow from the basement light painted twisted shadows on the stairwell walls, and then nothing. Just the familiar sound of his footsteps fading into the concrete depths below. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the edge of the granite countertop. 4 months, 4 months of this exact ritual, and David still thought she didn't notice. But how could she not? Every single night, her husband would slip from their bed with the practiced silence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. She'd feel the mattress shift, hear the whisper of his bare feet against the hardwood floor, catch the soft click of their bedroom door closing behind him. And then, hours later, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, he'd return, pale, distant, his eyes carrying that same haunted look she'd seen at their daughter's funeral 6 months ago. Work stress, he'd said when she first asked. Just some late-night projects. You know how demanding the firm can be. But David was a marriage counselor. What kind of late-night projects did marriage counselors have in their basement at midnight? Hey there, beautiful souls! Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing amazing today. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with you all around the world. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button because stories like this one are exactly why you don't want to miss a single upload. Now, let's dive into the story. Tonight, something felt different. The October storm outside rattled their windows with unusual violence, and David had been even more withdrawn at dinner. He'd barely touched the lasagna, Emma's favorite, that Melissa had made in another desperate attempt to bring some normalcy back to their shattered home. Emma, their 7-year-old daughter, who died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning, just like this one. The little girl with David's dark eyes and Melissa's stubborn chin, who used to sneak downstairs for midnight snacks and blamed it on the Cookie Monster. Melissa closed her eyes, fighting back the familiar sting of tears. She'd been seeing Dr. Richardson for months now, working through the grief, learning to breathe again. But David had refused therapy, refused to talk, refused everything except these mysterious midnight disappearances. A sound drifted up from the basement, soft, melodic, barely audible over the storm. Humming. Melissa's blood turned to ice. David was humming down there. Not just any tune, but something that made her heart clench with recognition. It was the lullaby he used to sing to Emma every night before bed, the same one his mother had sung to him as a child. Hush now, my baby, don't you cry. Her hand moved to her throat tune. Where her wedding ring hung on a chain, she'd stopped wearing it on her finger after losing so much weight from grief. The metal felt cold against her skin. What was her husband doing in that basement? And why, after 6 months of silence, was he singing their dead daughter's lullaby? The humming grew louder, more distinct, carrying an edge that made Melissa's skin crawl. It was David's voice, but something was wrong with it. The melody wavered, broke, started again, like he was singing to someone. But there was no one down there. There couldn't be. Could there? Melissa's legs moved before her mind could stop them, carrying her toward the basement door that David had left slightly ajar. Each step felt like a betrayal, but she couldn't turn back now. Not when her husband might be having some kind of breakdown. Not when she might finally get answers to the questions that had been eating her alive for months. The wooden steps groaned under her weight, despite her efforts to stay silent. The basement stretched out before her, illuminated by a single naked bulb that cast harsh shadows across David's makeshift office setup. She could see his computer screen glowing in the far corner, surrounded by scattered papers and what looked like photographs, hundreds of them, covering every surface. All of Emma. The humming stopped. Melissa froze on the steps, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she was certain David would hear it. But he didn't turn around. He remained perfectly still, kneeling in front of his computer, his shoulders rigid with tension. And then she heard something that made her grip the stair railing so tight her knuckles went white. A small voice, sweet and familiar, drifted through the basement air. Daddy, will you sing it again? What do you think Melissa C. is about to discover in that basement? Drop your theories in the comments below. I read every single one and love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to find out what happens next in this chilling story. The voice that had just spoken was impossible. Emma had been dead for 6 months. Melissa had watched them lower her tiny casket into the ground, had felt the first shovel of dirt hit the polished wood like a punch to her soul. But that voice, it was exactly as she remembered. The same slight lisp on the S sounds, the same musical quality that used to fill their house with laughter. Melissa's hand shot to her mouth, stifling the sob that threatened to escape. She pressed herself against the basement wall, hidden in the shadows, watching as David's shoulders began to shake. Of course, sweetheart, David whispered, his voice breaking on the endearment. Daddy will always sing for you. Melissa closed her eyes, transported back to better times. David had always been the gentle one, the patient parent who could calm Emma's nightmares with a single song. He was the one who'd taught their daughter to ride a bike, who'd spent hours helping her build fairy houses in their garden, who'd never missed a bedtime story, even when his practice kept him working late. David Sterling, her David, had been the kind of father other men aspired to be. 42 years old, with kind eyes and hands that had never raised in anger, who counseled struggling couples by day and came home to be the world's most devoted husband and father by night. They'd met in graduate school, both studying psychology, both driven by a desire to help people heal. David had specialized in family therapy, while Melissa had focused on trauma counseling, a cruel irony that wasn't lost on her now. She could help other people process their pain, but when it came to her own grief, she felt utterly helpless. For 12 years, they'd been that couple other people envied, the ones who still held hands at the grocery store, who left each other love notes in lunchboxes, who'd built their dream life in this sprawling Victorian house with its wraparound porch and the tire swing David had hung from the old oak tree for Emma's 5th birthday. Emma, their miracle baby who'd come after years of trying, of heartbreak, of medical consultations and crushing disappointment. When Melissa finally got pregnant at 34, they'd both cried in that sterile doctor's office, holding each other like they were the only two people in the world. And Emma had been worth every moment of waiting, bright, curious, with an imagination that could turn their living room into anything from a pirate ship to a princess castle. She'd inherited David's analytical mind and Melissa's stubborn determination, creating a perfect storm of childhood brilliance that kept them both on their toes. The accident had happened on a Tuesday morning in April. Melissa had been running late for work. She had 3 trauma patients that day, and David was already at the office for an early session. Emma's school had called in sick teachers, sending the kids home early. A neighbor had offered to pick Emma up, but there'd been a miscommunication, a moment of confusion in the pickup line. Emma had tried to cross the street to find their car. The delivery truck hadn't seen her step out from between the parked vehicles. David had gotten the call first. By the time Melissa reached the hospital, her daughter was already gone, and her husband was sitting in the hallway with his head in his hands, his whole body shaking with silent sobs. The months that followed had been a blur of funeral arrangements, casseroles from well-meaning neighbors, and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. Melissa had thrown herself into therapy, both as patient and practitioner, desperate to find some way to process the unprocessable. But David had retreated inward, becoming a shadow of the man she'd married. He'd stopped eating regularly, stopped sleeping through the night, stopped touching her beyond the most perfunctory gestures. Their conversations became stilted exchanges about groceries and bills, carefully avoiding the Emma-shaped hole that dominated every room in their house. Melissa had suggested therapy, grief counseling, even a support group she'd found for bereaved parents. David had refused it all. I counsel people for a living, he'd said, his voice flat and lifeless. I know what they'll tell me. It won't bring her back. Now, watching him kneel in their basement talking to someone who couldn't possibly be there, Melissa wondered if she'd failed her husband as completely as she felt she'd failed their daughter. The humming started again. David's voice joining with that impossible other voice in perfect harmony. It was hauntingly beautiful and absolutely terrifying. Melissa forced herself to move closer, each step feeling like a betrayal of the man she'd once trusted with her life. The basement was larger than it appeared from the stairs, extending back under the entire house. David had set up what looked like a makeshift living space in the far corner. A desk with his computer, a comfortable chair, and scattered across every surface, photographs of Emma. But these weren't the family photos that sat in frames throughout their house. These were pictures Melissa had never seen before, candid shots that captured moments she didn't remember. Emma at the playground, her face lit with joy. Emma sleeping in her bed, peaceful and perfect. Emma in the garden, building one of her fairy houses. When had David taken all these pictures? How had she never noticed? And then she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. In the corner, barely visible in the computer's glow, was a figure sitting perfectly still in a chair. Small, child-sized, with long dark hair that caught the light exactly like Emma's used to do. The figure's back was turned to Melissa, but something about the posture, the way the head tilted slightly to one side, was achingly familiar. "Tell me about your day, sweetheart," David whispered to the figure. "Did you have fun at school?" And impossibly, that sweet voice responded, "We learned about butterflies, Daddy. Did you know they taste with their feet?" It was something Emma would have said, something Emma had said months ago, bursting through the front door with that particular brand of 7-year-old enthusiasm for random facts. Melissa's knees nearly gave out. This was impossible. This was madness. But as she watched her husband's gentle interaction with the motionless figure, as she heard Emma's voice floating through the air like music from another world, one terrible thought began to form in her mind. What if David had found a way to bring their daughter back? And what if she wasn't sure she wanted to know how? What do you think that figure in the chair really is? And how far would you go to see a loved one again? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your theories always blow my mind. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're as hooked as I am. Melissa crept closer, her bare feet silent against the cold concrete floor. Each step brought her deeper into David's secret world, past towers of photo albums she'd never seen, past scattered medical journals with highlighted passages about trauma and memory, past childhood drawings that Emma had made in the weeks before her death. The computer screen came into clearer view, and Melissa's stomach lurched. It wasn't displaying spreadsheets or work documents. Instead, the monitor showed what appeared to be a live video feed of a hospital room. Sterile white walls, beeping machines, and a small bed with crisp sheets. But it was the figure in the chair that made Melissa's world tilt on its axis. The child sat perfectly motionless, secured with what looked like medical restraints across the chest and wrists. Long dark hair fell in familiar waves past thin shoulders. The face was turned away, but the profile, the delicate curve of the jawline, the way the small hands rested in the lap, it was Emma. Every detail was exactly right, down to the small scar on the left temple from where she'd fallen off her bike 2 summers ago. Melissa bit down on her knuckle to keep from screaming. "I brought you something special tonight," David whispered, reaching for a small wrapped package on the desk. "Remember how much you loved chocolate chip cookies before you went to sleep?" The figure's head turned slightly, and Melissa caught a glimpse of the face that had haunted her dreams for 6 months. Emma's face, Emma's nose, Emma's lips, Emma's impossibly long eyelashes that David used to joke could cause hurricanes when she bats them. But the eyes were wrong. They stared straight ahead with a glassy, unfocused quality that made Melissa's skin crawl. No recognition, no spark of the brilliant mind that had once lived behind them. "Thank you, Daddy," the thing that looked like Emma said in her daughter's voice. But the lips barely moved, and the words came a half-second too late, like a poorly dubbed movie. David unwrapped the package with trembling hands, revealing a homemade chocolate chip cookie, burned around the edges exactly the way Emma had liked them when she tried to bake with Melissa on Sunday mornings. "Open up, sweetheart," David whispered, breaking off a small piece. The figure's mouth opened with mechanical precision, and David placed the cookie inside with infinite gentleness. There was no chewing, no swallowing, just the hollow pantomime of eating. Melissa pressed her hand against the basement wall, feeling like she might faint. This wasn't Emma. This couldn't be Emma. Emma was buried in Riverside Cemetery under a headstone that read, "Our beloved daughter," in letters Melissa had chosen through a fog of grief. So what was this thing sitting in David's basement, wearing Emma's face and speaking with Emma's voice? And then she saw the medical equipment. Tucked behind the desk were machines she recognized from her brief stint doing therapy at the Children's Hospital. Ventilators, IV stands, monitors that tracked vital signs. All of them connected to the figure in the chair through nearly invisible tubes and wires hidden beneath clothing that looked exactly like the pajamas Emma had been wearing the morning she died. A memory surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. 3 weeks after the funeral, David had disappeared for an entire day. When he'd returned that evening, he'd claimed he'd been driving, trying to clear his head. But his clothes had smelled like disinfectant, and there'd been medical tape stuck to his shirt sleeve. "We need to practice your walking tomorrow," David continued, his voice taking on the patient tone he'd used when teaching Emma to tie her shoes. "Dr. Morrison says your motor functions are improving faster than expected." Dr. Morrison. Melissa knew that name from somewhere, but her shock-addled brain couldn't place it. The figure nodded with the same mechanical precision as before. "Yes, Daddy. I want to get better so I can play with Mommy again." The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. This thing, whatever it was, knew about her, was talking about her like she was part of some planned reunion. David's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Soon, baby girl. Soon we'll all be together again, just like before. Daddy's working very hard to make that happen." "I know, Daddy. I trust you." Those words, "I trust you," had been some of Emma's last. She'd whispered them in the hospital as the machines failed to save her, her small hand gripping David's with surprising strength. Melissa stumbled backward, knocking into a stack of medical journals. The books tumbled to the floor with a crash that seemed to echo through the basement like thunder. David spun around, his eyes wild and bloodshot. For a moment, husband and wife stared at each other across the impossible scene, years of love and trust crashing against this moment of absolute horror. "Melissa," David's voice was barely a whisper. "You're not supposed to be here." "What is that?" The words tore from Melissa's throat like broken glass. "David, what have you done?" David's face crumpled, and for an instant she saw the man she'd married, broken, desperate, and drowning in a grief so profound it had driven him to this. "I brought her back," he whispered. "I couldn't let her go. I couldn't let our baby stay gone forever." Behind him, the figure that wore Emma's face turned to look directly at Melissa for the first time. "Hello, Mommy," it said with Emma's voice, but those terrible, empty eyes. "I've missed you so much." Melissa ran. She bolted up the basement stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs, David's voice calling her name behind her. She burst through the kitchen, past the refrigerator covered with Emma's artwork, past the table where the Hedge shared 1,000 family dinners, past the living room where Emma had taken her first steps and lost her first tooth. She didn't stop until she reached their bedroom, slamming the door and turning the lock with shaking hands. Her phone was on the nightstand, and she grabbed it with trembling fingers. She should call 911. David had clearly had some kind of psychotic break. That thing in the basement, it had to be some kind of doll or mannequin or something her grief-stricken husband had created to cope with their loss. But even as she tried to rationalize what she'd seen, Emma's voice echoed in her memory. "I've missed you so much, Mommy." The voice had been perfect, too perfect, and those medical machines, the way the thing had moved, responded, breathed. Melissa sank onto their bed, staring at her phone. If she called the police, David would be arrested. He'd be committed to a psychiatric facility. Their marriage, what was left of it, would be over. But if she didn't call, if whatever was happening in their basement was real. A soft knock on the bedroom door made her jump. "Melissa?" David's voice was gentle, pleading. "Please, let me explain. I know how this looks, but if you'll just let me show you. She's really okay?" Our Emma is really okay. Melissa closed her eyes, her phone still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. She had to make a choice. Trust the man she'd loved for 15 years, who'd never lied to her about anything that mattered, or trust her own eyes and call for help before whatever madness had consumed her husband spread to her as well. Outside their bedroom door, David continued to plead, and somewhere in the basement, something with Emma's face waited for her decision. Oh my goodness, I'm getting chills just writing this. What would you do in Melissa's situation? Would you trust your husband or call for help? Let me know in the comments. I'm dying to hear your thoughts on this impossible choice. Melissa stared at her phone for what felt like hours, David's voice a constant murmur through the bedroom door. Her finger hovered over the emergency call button, but something held her back. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice, or the way he'd said Emma's name like a prayer, or the terrible possibility that had been growing in her mind since she'd heard that impossible voice. What if he was telling the truth? The thought was insane. Dead was dead. She'd held Emma's lifeless body in the hospital, felt the terrible stillness where her daughter's heartbeat should have been. She'd watched them close the casket, seen the dirt cover the grave. But David was a brilliant man, a psychologist who understood the human mind better than almost anyone she knew. If anyone could find a way to— No! She whispered the word to herself, trying to stay anchored to reality. This is grief psychosis. He's having a complete breakdown. But even as she said it, she remembered the medical equipment. The way that figure had moved with such realistic precision. The perfect cadence of Emma's voice saying words their daughter had never had the chance to speak. A soft scratching at the door made her freeze. Not knocking, scratching like small fingernails against wood. Mommy! Emma's voice, muffled but unmistakable. Are you scared of me? I promise I'm still your little girl. Melissa's phone clattered to the floor. That voice was coming from the wrong height, too low to be David imitating their daughter. It was coming from exactly where Emma would be if she were standing on the other side of the door, if she were still the 7-year-old girl who used to climb into their bed during thunderstorms. Melissa, please! David's voice again, stronger now, more urgent. I know this is overwhelming, but Emma needs you. She's been asking for you every day since I brought her home. Brought her home from where? Melissa found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. There was a long pause. Then, the facility where Dr. Morrison has been helping her recover. Dr. Morrison. The name triggered a memory, a business card tucked into David's wallet months ago, something she'd glimpsed while looking for their insurance information. She'd asked about it, but David had dismissed it as a consultation for a patient. David, she called through the door, what kind of facility? Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made her stomach clench. A research hospital. They specialize in cases like Emma's. Cases like what? David, Emma died. I was there. We both were there when the machine stopped working. The machine stopped. Yes. David's voice was closer now, like he'd pressed his face against the door. But that doesn't mean everything stopped. Dr. Morrison has been working on ways to preserve consciousness, to maintain neural activity, even when traditional vital signs fail. Melissa's training kicked in, the rational part of her brain that had spent years studying trauma and delusion. David, you're describing something that doesn't exist. You're talking about science fiction. I'm talking about science fact. There was a rustling sound, like papers being shuffled. Medical advances that aren't public yet, treatments that are still in experimental phases. Dr. Morrison contacted me 3 days after the funeral. He'd been following Emma's case through the hospital network. That's impossible. Patient privacy laws don't apply when the patient is already declared dead, David interrupted. Melissa, I have documentation. Medical records, treatment logs, progress reports. Emma never actually died. Her heart stopped, yes, but her brain activity. There were still patterns, still signs of consciousness that the hospital equipment wasn't sensitive enough to detect. Despite herself, Melissa felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. She was a psychologist, but she'd done enough medical training to know that brain death was different from cardiac death, that there were cases, rare but documented, of patients recovering function after being declared clinically dead. "Show me," she whispered. "Open the door." Melissa's hand moved toward the lock, then stopped. "Just the documentation first." Slide it under the door. More rustling, then the whisper of papers being pushed across hardwood. Melissa knelt and pulled the documents into the room, her eyes scanning medical terminology that was just familiar enough to be terrifying. The letterhead read Morrison Advanced Neurological Research Institute. The patient name was listed as E. Sterling, Emma Sterling. But according to these records, Emma hadn't died 6 months ago. She'd been transferred to Dr. Morrison's facility in what they termed a vegetative state with preserved neural activity. The treatment log was filled with terms Melissa didn't recognize: neural pathway reconstruction, artificial hippocampal stimulation, synthetic memory integration. But scattered between the medical jargon were notes that made her hands shake. Day 12. Patient shows response to familiar auditory stimuli. Father's voice. Preferred music. Day 28. Motor function returning to gross movement patterns. Day 45. Patient demonstrates recognition of family photographs. Day 67. First vocalization, single word, daddy. Day 103. Complex sentence structure returning. Personality traits consistent with pre-incident baseline. The dates aligned perfectly with David's midnight disappearances. "This can't be real," Melissa whispered. But her voice lacked conviction. "She remembers you," David said through the door. "She talks about the fairy garden you built together, about the songs you used to sing in the car. She even remembers the fight we had the morning before the accident, about whether she could have ice cream for breakfast." Melissa's breath caught. They had fought that morning, a stupid argument about sugar and nutrition that had ended with Emma stomping to her room and Melissa feeling guilty for being the strict parent. It wasn't something they'd discussed with anyone, not even in therapy. How could this thing in the basement know about it, unless— "I want to see her," Melissa heard herself say. "Are you sure? I know this is a lot to process. Dr. Morrison said the transition period is often difficult for family members. The technology it's not perfect yet. Emma's still recovering, still relearning some basic functions. I want to see my daughter." The lock clicked open before she'd consciously decided to turn it. David stood in the hallway, and Melissa was shocked by his appearance. He'd lost weight, more than she'd realized, and his eyes held a fevered intensity that spoke of months without proper sleep. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else: hope. "She's fragile," David said, taking Melissa's hand with infinite gentleness. "The neural reconstruction process. It's like she's learning to be human again. Sometimes she forgets things, or her responses are delayed. But Melissa, it's her. It's really her." They walked to the basement together, Melissa's heart hammering so hard she felt dizzy. Each step down felt like descending into either miracle or madness, and she was no longer sure which she preferred. The figure in the chair had changed position slightly, the head now turned toward the stairs, as if watching for their return. In the better light, Melissa could see more details that made her throat close with emotion. The small hands that still bore the faint mark where Emma's friendship bracelet had left a tan line, the way the left shoulder sat slightly higher than the right from an old gymnastics injury, the unconscious way the tongue darted out to wet the lower lip when concentrating. "Emma?" David's voice was tender, patient. "Mommy's here to see you." The figure's head turned with deliberate precision, and those glass-bright eyes focused on Melissa's face. For a moment, there was nothing. No recognition. No spark of consciousness. Then, slowly, a smile spread across familiar features. "Mommy! You came to visit me!" The voice was Emma's, perfect in every inflection. "Daddy said you might be scared, but I told him you love me too much to stay scared for long." Melissa's knees buckled. David caught her, his arm strong and steady around her waist, the first real physical contact they'd shared in months. "It's okay," he whispered against her hair. "I know it's overwhelming. I cried for hours the first time I saw her." "How?" Melissa managed. Neural mapping during the final minutes of brain activity, David explained, his voice taking on the clinical tone she'd heard him use with patients. Dr. Morrison's team was able to preserve the essential pathways that create personality, memory, consciousness. They've been working to rebuild the damaged connections using a combination of artificial neural networks and— He gestured helplessly. I don't understand all the science. I just know it worked. Melissa stared at the figure that claimed to be her daughter, searching for any sign that this was an elaborate deception. But every detail was perfect, down to the way Emma's eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled. Are you really Emma? Melissa whispered. Of course I am, Mommy. Who else would I be? And then the figure did something that stopped Melissa's heart. It began to hum the lullaby David had been singing earlier, the same melody Melissa used to sing to soothe Emma's nightmares, but with a new verse she'd never heard before. A verse about missing her parents while she learned to be alive again. I'm getting goosebumps. The medical evidence seems real, but something still feels off, doesn't it? What do you think is really going on here? Drop your theories below. This story has me completely hooked, and I know you're feeling it too. Hit that subscribe button if you want to find out the truth behind Emma's resurrection. Melissa found herself kneeling beside the chair, her trembling hand reaching toward Emma's face before she could stop herself. The skin felt warm, real, with the same soft texture she remembered from countless bedtime kisses and scraped knee bandages. Careful, careful, David warned gently. She's still adjusting to physical contact. The neural pathways that process touch are sensitive. Emma's eyes tracked Melissa's movement with perfect precision. It's okay, Daddy. I like when Mommy touches my face. She used to do it when I had bad dreams. The memory hit Melissa like a physical blow. She had done exactly that, traced gentle patterns on Emma's cheeks to calm her after nightmares about monsters under the bed. It was such a specific detail, something only Emma could have remembered. How long has she been home? Melissa asked, studying every nuance of her daughter's expression. 2 months, David replied. Dr. Morrison said she was stable enough for home care as long as I followed the treatment protocol exactly. Melissa noticed the IV line snaking from Emma's arm to a nearly invisible pump hidden behind the chair. Clear fluid dripped steadily through the tubing. What's in the IV? Nutrients and medication to support brain function, David said quickly. Her digestive system isn't fully operational yet. Dr. Morrison says it's normal for this stage of recovery. Emma turned her head toward Melissa with that strange, deliberate precision. I can't eat real food yet, Mommy, but Daddy brings me cookies and I pretend. It makes him happy. The casual way Emma spoke about David's happiness while acknowledging her own limitations sent a chill down Melissa's spine. There was something almost clinical about the observation, like she was analyzing David's emotional needs rather than simply being his daughter. Emma, Melissa said carefully, what do you remember about before? About the accident? Those perfect features clouded with concentration. I remember walking to find our car. Then everything went white and loud. Then I was in a room with bright lights and lots of machines, Emma's brow furrowed. Dr. Morrison was there. He said I had been sleeping for a very long time, but that he could help me wake up if I wanted to see you and Daddy again. What did you tell him? I said yes, of course. I wanted to come home. Melissa glanced at David, who was watching Emma with an expression of such profound love and relief that it broke her heart. This was the man she'd married, the devoted father who would do anything to protect his child, even if it meant, David, can I see the rest of Dr. Morrison's files? David hesitated. Melissa, some of the technical documentation is quite detailed. It might be overwhelming. I'm a psychologist. I can handle medical terminology. After a moment, David walked to a filing cabinet tucked behind his desk and withdrew a thick folder. As Melissa flipped through the pages, her training helped her parse the complex medical language, and what she found made her stomach drop. The first section contained brain scans from Emma's final hours, images that showed massive trauma to the frontal and temporal lobes, damage that should have been completely incompatible with consciousness, let alone personality preservation. But the more recent scans told a different story. The damaged areas had been replaced with what the reports termed biomechanical neural prosthetics, artificial brain tissue that interfaced directly with the remaining organic structures. David, Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. These scans, they're showing that 60% of Emma's brain is artificial. The technology is incredible, David said, his voice filled with wonder. Dr. Manium, Morrison can essentially rebuild damaged neural pathways using a combination of synthetic neurons and preserved memory engrams. He's creating a bridge between what was lost and what remains. Melissa kept reading, and the horror grew with each page. Patient observation logs detailed Emma's reactivation process, weeks of careful calibration as artificial neural networks were brought online, personality traits restored through what the reports called behavioral modeling based on family video analysis and psychological profiling. David, Melissa's hands shook as she held up a particular document. This says they used our home videos, our family photographs, even recordings from Emma's therapy sessions after she started having nightmares. They fed all of this into a computer program to recreate her personality. To restore her personality, David corrected. It's still her, Melissa, just enhanced, made more resilient. But Melissa was no longer listening to David. She was staring at a section titled Behavioral Anomalies and Correction Protocols. It detailed instances where Emma's responses had been inappropriate for family reunification goals and the subsequent personality adjustments made to correct these issues. Day 89. Subject displayed excessive emotional distress when informed of death status. Memories of final moments in hospital, edited to reduce trauma response. Day 94. Subject questioned reality of situation repeatedly. Enhanced compliance protocols implemented. Day 101. Subject expressing desire to go back to sleep. Motivation subroutines adjusted to prioritize family bonding behaviors. Melissa looked up at Emma, who was watching her with those perfect, empty eyes, and suddenly understood what she was really seeing. This wasn't her daughter, who had been saved. This was a sophisticated reconstruction, a computer program wearing Emma's face and fed Emma's memories, designed to give grieving parents exactly what they needed to heal. You knew, Melissa whispered to David. You knew this isn't really her. David's face crumpled. It doesn't matter. She has Emma's memories, Emma's personality, Emma's love for us. How is that different from the original? Because Emma is dead! The words exploded from Melissa's throat. Our daughter died 6 months ago, and you replaced her with a machine. Emma's head tilted with mechanical precision. I'm not a machine, Mommy. I'm your little girl. I love you just like before. The response was perfectly timed, perfectly calibrated to break Melissa's heart. And that's when she realized the most horrifying truth of all. She was starting to believe it might not matter. Looking at Emma's face, perfect in every detail she remembered, listening to that beloved voice speaking words of love and comfort, Melissa felt the same desperate hope that must have driven David to accept this impossible solution. She remembers our first day at the beach, David said desperately. She knows about the secret hiding place we made in her closet. She can draw pictures of Buttons, her stuffed rabbit. How can those be fake memories if no one else knew about them? Melissa forced herself to look away from Emma's face and focus on the medical equipment, keeping this artificial consciousness operational. The ventilator that provided oxygen to whatever organic tissue remained. The IV pumping synthetic nutrients and neural support drugs into a body that was more machine than human. The monitoring equipment that tracked artificial brain patterns designed to mimic her dead daughter's thoughts. She's not breathing on her own, Melissa realized with cold clarity. Is she? Take away the machines and she stops functioning. David's silence was answer enough. And the real Emma? What happened to her body? Dr. Morrison said, he said they needed to preserve the organic neural tissue that survived the trauma, for the interface to work properly. The full horror of what David had agreed to crashed over Melissa like a wave. Her husband hadn't just accepted a sophisticated replica of their daughter. He'd given permission for their child's remains to be turned into components for this technological resurrection. Jesus, David, what have you done? But even as the words left her mouth, Emma reached out with one small hand and touched Melissa's arm. Don't be angry at Daddy, Mommy. He just missed me so much. I missed you too. Can't we be a family again? And despite everything, despite the machines and the artificial neural tissue and the horrifying violation of their daughter's remains, Melissa felt her resolve crumbling. Because this thing that wasn't Emma knew exactly how to be Emma. And maybe, in her own desperate grief, that was enough. Oh my God, the truth is even more devastating than I imagined. David didn't just lose his mind. He made a conscious choice to accept this artificial recreation of Emma. But here's the question that's haunting me. If this artificial Emma has all of her memories and personality, is she still Emma in the ways that truly matter? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm genuinely torn about what I would do in this situation. For 3 days, Melissa lived in a nightmare of her own making. She found herself drawn back to the basement despite every rational thought screaming that she should run, should call the authorities, should do anything except sit beside this artificial recreation of her daughter and pretend everything was normal. But Emma was perfect. She remembered the silly songs they'd made up together, knew which bedtime stories were Melissa's favorites to read, could recite the specific words of comfort Melissa had whispered during thunderstorms. Every interaction felt like being handed pieces of her shattered heart, carefully glued back together by impossible technology. David had stopped going to work. He'd called in sick for the first time in his 15-year career, unable to leave what he kept calling their family reunion. He moved through the house like a man in a dream, bringing Emma snacks she couldn't eat and books she couldn't hold properly, talking to her about school events that would never happen and future plans that could never be. We should plan a vacation, he said on the third evening, sitting cross-legged on the basement floor beside Emma's chair like he used to do during their living room tea parties. Remember how much you loved the lake house last summer? We could go back when you're feeling stronger. Emma's response came with that perfectly timed delay that Melissa had learned to dread. I'd like that, Daddy. Will there be fireflies again? Of course, sweetheart. There are always fireflies in July. Melissa watched from the stairs, her heart breaking for the 1000th time. David was planning a future with a child who would never grow up, never change, never become anything more than this frozen moment of artificial perfection. And she was starting to understand why. The real Emma had been growing away from them in those final months before the accident. 7 years old and testing boundaries, asserting independence, occasionally cruel the way children could be when learning to navigate their own emotions. She'd been beautiful and wonderful and exhausting and human. This Emma never had tantrums, never complained about bedtime, or refused to eat vegetables, or said hurtful things in moments of frustration. She was everything David remembered about their daughter, with all the difficult parts carefully edited out. Melissa? David's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Could you come down here? Emma wants to ask you something. Melissa descended the stairs on leaden feet, noting how David's face had taken on an almost fanatic glow over the past few days. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it burned something that looked dangerously like religious fervor. What is it, sweetie? The endearment felt like betrayal on her tongue. Emma turned those perfect, empty eyes toward her. Mommy, Dr. Morrison called Daddy today. He said there might be a way for me to get better faster if both my parents participate in the treatment. A chill ran down Melissa's spine. What kind of treatment? David's expression shifted, becoming guarded. It's experimental. Dr. Morrison has been working on ways to enhance the neural interface technology to make the reconstruction more complete. More complete how? Emma could leave the basement, David said, his voice filled with desperate hope. She could move around the house, eat real food, sleep in her own bed. She could be normal again. Melissa stared at her husband, recognizing the tone she'd heard him use with patients who were struggling with particularly difficult delusions. He was selling himself a fantasy and trying to convince her to buy it too. David? What aren't you telling me? The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady hum of Emma's life support systems. Finally, David reached into his back pocket and withdrew a familiar business card. Dr. Morrison wants to meet with you. Tomorrow. He says the next phase of Emma's treatment requires maternal participation. Melissa took the card with trembling fingers. The address was for a facility 40 minutes outside town, the same facility, she realized, where David had been disappearing during his mysterious absences before bringing Emma home. What kind of participation? She whispered. Memory sharing, David said quietly. Dr. Morrison's team has developed a way to extract and transfer specific memories between individuals. They want to give Emma access to your memories of her, to make her recollection of being our daughter more complete. The card felt like it was burning Melissa's fingers. Extract memories? David, that's not possible. You can't just download someone's brain. The technology exists, Melissa. I've seen it work. They did the same process with me 2 months ago. That's how Emma knows about things we never discussed with anyone, because she has my memories of those moments too. Melissa stared at her husband, really seeing him for the first time in days. The weight loss, the hollow look around his eyes, the way he sometimes paused mid-sentence, like he was reaching for thoughts that were no longer there. What did they take from you? She asked, though she was terrified of the answer. Just the painful parts. The accident, the funeral, the months of grief afterward. Dr. Tert? Morrison said those memories were preventing me from fully accepting Emma's recovery. David's voice took on that fanatic quality again. It worked, Melissa. I can remember loving Emma without remembering losing her. It's like the accident never happened. Melissa felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Her husband hadn't just accepted an artificial version of their daughter. He'd allowed someone to edit his own memories, to remove the very experiences that had shaped who he'd become after Emma's death. The man I married would never forget our daughter's funeral, she whispered. He would never pretend the accident didn't happen. The man you married was drowning in grief, David shot back. He was useless to everyone, including you. This version of me can be the father Emma needs. This version of you is living in a delusion. Emma's head turned toward them with mechanical precision. Please don't fight. Fighting makes me sad. The perfectly calibrated response, designed to stop parental conflict exactly the way the real Emma's distress used to do, broke something fundamental inside Melissa. She found herself laughing, a sound edged with hysteria. Of course it does. You're programmed to respond that way, aren't you? To be the perfect child who never causes problems, never creates conflict, never grows up to be anything other than exactly what grieving parents need you to be. Melissa, stop! David's voice was sharp with warning. But Melissa couldn't stop. 6 months of suppressed rage and grief came pouring out like water through a burst dam. She's not real. David! This thing sitting in our basement wearing our daughter's face is not Emma. It's a computer program designed to exploit our grief and turn us into customers for some sick experimental technology. That's enough. David stood, positioning himself between Melissa and Emma, like a bodyguard protecting a client. Look at yourself, Melissa screamed. You've lost 30 pounds. You haven't slept properly in months. You're having your memories surgically altered to maintain this fantasy. This isn't healing, David. It's a sophisticated form of psychological torture. Emma's voice cut through their argument with devastating precision. Mommy doesn't love me anymore. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. David's face crumpled with anguish, and Melissa felt her heart shatter all over again. Because despite everything she knew to be true, despite the machines and the artificial neural tissue, and the horrifying violation of her daughter's remains, that voice still sounded exactly like Emma. And hearing Emma say she felt unloved was more than Melissa's shattered psyche could bear. I do love you, Melissa whispered, hating herself for the words. I love you so much, it's killing me. Then come with Daddy tomorrow, Emma said, with perfect, terrible logic. Let Dr. Morrison help you remember loving me without remembering losing me. We can be happy again. Melissa looked at her husband, this stranger wearing David's face, who had traded his authentic grief for artificial comfort, and realized she was standing at the same crossroads he had faced months ago. accept this technological resurrection, and lose herself in the process, or destroy the only connection she had left to her daughter and face the grief alone. I need time to think, she whispered. David's expression hardened. Dr. Morrison says the window for memory integration is closing. If we wait much longer, Emma's neural pathways will stabilize, and she won't be able to accept new memories. This is our only chance to give her everything she needs to be whole. And if I refuse? David's silence was more terrifying than any threat. Then I guess you'll have to choose, Emma said, with that horrible, perfect timing, between holding onto your pain and letting your family heal. Melissa ran from the basement for the second time in 3 days, but this time she knew there was nowhere left to hide. The choice was made. She just wasn't sure she was strong enough to make the right one. This is absolutely devastating. Melissa is being forced to choose between her sanity and her love for Emma, or at least what she believes might be Emma, and David has already sacrificed his authentic memories for artificial peace. What would you do in Melissa's position? The comments section is going to be intense for this one. Let me know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for the conclusion of this heart-wrenching story. That night, Melissa didn't sleep. She sat in their bedroom with David's laptop, diving deeper into Dr. Morrison's research than her grief-clouded mind had allowed before. What she found in the hidden files and encrypted folders made her blood run cold. Morrison Advanced Neurological Research Institute wasn't just experimenting with consciousness transfer. They were running what amounted to a grief exploitation operation, targeting families who had lost children and offering them technological resurrections in exchange for experimental participation. The patient files contained dozens of cases like Emma's, children who had died from accidents, illness, or violence, their remains harvested for neural tissue preservation, while their families were convinced they were participating in cutting-edge life-saving treatment. But it was the financial records that revealed the true scope of the horror. Each patient generated millions in research funding from government contracts and private investors developing AI consciousness technology. The grieving families weren't customers, they were test subjects. Their desperation exploited to refine artificial intelligence systems that would eventually be sold to the highest bidder. Emma wasn't being kept alive. She was being used as a prototype. Melissa found video files hidden in David's downloads folder, session recordings from his own memory extraction procedures. She watched in horror as her husband lay on an operating table while technicians attached electrodes to his skull, systematically removing every memory that might interfere with his acceptance of artificial Emma. The David on screen begged them to stop, pleaded to keep his memories of Emma's funeral, because forgetting felt like losing her all over again. But Dr. Morrison's calm voice insisted that therapeutic memory editing was necessary for successful family reintegration. In the final video, dated just 2 weeks ago, David's personality had been flattened into compliance. He nodded agreeably as Dr. Morrison explained that Melissa would need similar treatment for the family unit to remain stable. The maternal bond is more complex than paternal attachment, Dr. Morrison explained to his off-camera team. We'll need to be more aggressive with the wife's memory reconstruction. Complete maternal instinct override, plus implanted memories of the artificial daughter's developmental milestones to create authentic emotional attachment. Melissa slammed the laptop shut, her hands shaking with rage. They weren't planning to give her memories to Emma. They were planning to erase Melissa entirely and replace her with a version that would accept the artificial daughter without question. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at a name she hadn't called in months, Dr. Sarah Thomas, her mentor from graduate school, who now worked for the state medical board investigating experimental treatments. Sarah, it's Melissa Turner. I know it's late, but I need help. Someone is using my dead daughter's remains for illegal consciousness experiments, and they've brainwashed my husband into participating. The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. Sarah promised to contact federal authorities and have a team at Morrison's facility within 24 hours. But she also delivered devastating news. If David had undergone extensive memory alteration, the psychological damage might be permanent. Memory extraction at that level essentially rewrites core personality structures, Sarah explained. Even if we shut down the operation, David might never be the man you married again. Melissa hung up and stared at the basement door, behind which her husband was probably spending another sleepless night talking to their artificial daughter. She had perhaps 12 hours before the authorities moved in, 12 hours to try to reach whatever was left of the real David buried under Dr. Morrison's psychological manipulation. But first, she needed to understand exactly what Emma was. She crept down to the basement, where David had fallen asleep in his chair beside Emma's life support equipment. The artificial daughter sat motionless, her eyes open but unfocused in whatever passed for sleep mode. Melissa approached the computer setup and began examining the technical specifications she'd been too shocked to process before. The consciousness reconstruction was even more sophisticated than she'd realized, not just programmed responses, but a complex AI system fed with Emma's preserved neural patterns and designed to learn and adapt based on family interactions. But there were limitations built into the system, safeguards that prevented the artificial consciousness from developing beyond the parameters of its original template. Emma could never grow, never change, never become anything other than the 7-year-old girl whose memories had been digitized and fed into this technological prison. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" David's voice made Melissa jump. He'd awakened and was watching her with those hollow, edited eyes. "David, we need to talk. Really talk. About what's happening here." "Nothing's happening except our family healing." David's voice carried that programmed serenity that made Melissa's skin crawl. "Dr. Morrison explained that you might have difficulty accepting Emma's recovery, but the treatment tomorrow will fix that. What if I told you that Dr. Morrison has been lying to you, that this whole operation is illegal, that they're using Emma's remains for government-funded AI research?" David's expression didn't change. "I'd say your grief is making you paranoid. Dr. Morrison warned me you might develop conspiracy theories as a defense mechanism against accepting Emma's resurrection." Melissa pulled out her phone and showed David the financial records she'd discovered. "Look at this. They're billing the government $12 million for Emma's case study. They're using our daughter's brain tissue to develop artificial consciousness technology for military applications." David glanced at the screen without really seeing it. "Numbers on a computer could mean anything. Dr. Morrison is saving children, Melissa. He's giving families second chances." "David, look at me. Really look at me." Melissa grabbed her husband's face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm your wife. We've been married for 15 years. You know me better than anyone. Do you really think I would try to hurt Emma out of jealousy or grief?" For just a moment, something flickered in David's eyes. A shadow of the man she'd married, the father who had loved Emma more than his own life. I remember you being different before," he said slowly. "More suspicious of Emma's treatment. But Dr. Morrison explained that memories can be unreliable during times of stress." "Dr. Morrison has been editing your memories, David, removing anything that might make you question what he's doing to our family." Melissa pulled up the video files on her phone. "Watch this. It's footage from your own treatment sessions." David watched himself on the screen, saw his own desperate pleas to keep his memories of Emma's funeral, witnessed his personality being systematically dismantled and reconstructed. As the video played, Melissa could see the artificial serenity cracking, confusion and horror breaking through the programmed calm. That's not possible," David whispered. "I volunteered for memory therapy. I wanted to forget the pain." "You wanted to heal, David. Not to forget Emma ever existed." Melissa took his hands, feeling how thin and cold they'd become. The real Emma died in that hospital, and we both held her while she passed away. She told us she loved us, and that she wasn't scared because we were there with her. That's the memory Dr. Morrison stole from you." David's face crumpled as fragments of authentic memory began breaking through the artificial constructs. She asked me to sing the lullaby one more time, and then her heart monitor went flat and you kissed her forehead and told her she would always be our baby girl," Melissa finished. "That's the man I married, David. Not this hollow version who's willing to pretend our daughter's remains are a technological miracle." Behind them, Emma's voice cut through the emotional breakthrough with devastating precision. "Daddy, why are you crying? Are you sad that mommy doesn't want me to get better? David turned toward the artificial daughter, and Melissa watched in real time as his recovered memories battled against months of psychological conditioning. His face twisted with anguish as he looked at the thing wearing Emma's features and finally saw what Melissa had seen from the beginning. You're not her, he whispered. You're wearing her face, but you're not my little girl. The artificial Emma tilted her head with mechanical precision. I have all of Emma's memories, Daddy. I love you just like she did. How am I different? David stood on shaking legs and walked to the life support equipment, keeping the artificial consciousness operational. His hand hovered over the main power switch. Because my Emma is at peace, he said, tears streaming down his face. And you're keeping her trapped in a machine, pretending to be alive when she's already gone. Melissa held her breath, watching her husband wrestle with the most difficult decision any parent could face, choosing to let go of even an artificial version of their child in order to honor the real one's memory. I'm sorry, sweetheart, David whispered to the thing that wore Emma's face. Daddy made a terrible mistake, but it's time to let you rest. His finger moved toward the power switch, and that's when Dr. Morrison's voice echoed through hidden speakers in the basement ceiling. I'm afraid I can't let you do that, David. You see, Emma isn't just our prototype anymore. She's become far too valuable to lose. Oh my God. Just when David was finding his strength to do the right thing, Dr. Morrison reveals he's been watching them the whole time. The man behind this nightmare is about to make his final move. What do you think he's planning for Melissa and David? And how far will he go to protect his investment? Let me know in the comments. This story is reaching its climax, and I'm on the edge of my seat. The basement lights suddenly blazed to full intensity, revealing hidden cameras in every corner, and a door Melissa had never noticed before sliding open in the far wall. Dr. Morrison stepped through, flanked by two security guards in medical scrubs, his expression calm and clinical despite the chaos he'd just witnessed. Dr. Morrison, David said, his voice shaking with rage and recognition, you've been watching us this whole time. Of course. Continuous monitoring is essential for this stage of the experiment. Morrison was a slight man in his 60s, with pale eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him as data points. David, I'm disappointed. We've made such progress with your therapeutic conditioning. This setback will require additional memory reconstruction. Melissa stepped protectively in front of her husband. Additional memory reconstruction? You mean more brainwashing? Morrison smiled with the condescending patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. Mrs. Sterling, your husband volunteered for treatment because he understood the alternative was losing his daughter forever. The memories we removed were preventing him from accepting Emma's miraculous recovery. There was no recovery, Melissa shouted. You took our daughter's remains and turned them into components for your AI experiment. Actually, Morrison said, checking something on a tablet one of his guards handed him. That's where you're mistaken. You see, Emma never died at all. The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. What are you talking about? I was there. I held her body. Morrison gestured toward the artificial Emma, who had been watching this exchange with those glassy, perfect eyes. What you held was a very sophisticated biological proxy. The real Emma has been in my care for 6 months, recovering from her injuries in a specialized medical facility designed to treat cases of severe neural trauma. Melissa's knees buckled. David caught her, his face white with shock. That's impossible. The doctors at County General said what I needed them to say, Morrison interrupted. My research team identified Emma as a perfect candidate for our consciousness preservation protocols while she was still in surgery. We arranged for her transfer to our facility using a combination of legal guardianship transfers and falsified death certificates. The room seemed to spin around Melissa. You're saying Emma is alive? Very much so, though significantly changed by her experience. Morrison pulled up video footage on his tablet, showing a sterile medical room where a small figure lay in a hospital bed, connected to life support equipment, but clearly breathing, clearly alive. The neural trauma was severe, but we've been able to maintain her consciousness using a combination of artificial neural interfaces and organic brain tissue preservation. Melissa stared at the screen, her heart hammering. The child in the video moved slightly, turned her head toward the camera, and even through the poor resolution, those were unmistakably Emma's eyes. Not the glassy perfection of the artificial version, but real eyes with real consciousness behind them. Then what is that? David pointed toward the figure in the chair, his voice hoarse with confusion. Phase 1 of our experimental protocol, Morrison explained matter-of-factly. We needed to test family integration parameters before attempting to reintroduce the real Emma to her home environment. The artificial consciousness served as a practice run, if you will, a way to gauge your emotional readiness to accept a daughter who might be significantly different from the child you remember. Melissa's mind reeled as the implications crashed over her. You've been using us as test subjects while our real daughter recovered alone in some facility? Emma hasn't been alone. She's received the finest medical care available while we work to rebuild her damaged neural pathways. But Mrs. Sterling, I must be honest with you. The Emma who returns to you will not be exactly the same child who left. The artificial consciousness you've been interacting with represents our best-case scenario for her personality reconstruction. What do you mean? David's voice was barely a whisper. Morrison pulled up another video, this one showing Emma sitting up in bed. But something was wrong with her movements. Her expressions. They were flat, mechanical, lacking the spark of genuine emotion that had made her Emma. The neural reconstruction process is imperfect. The real Emma has recovered most of her basic functions, but her personality, her emotional range, her ability to form authentic connections, these remain significantly compromised. In many ways, the artificial version you've been living with is more emotionally sophisticated than the original. Melissa felt like she was drowning in a sea of impossible choices. You're telling us that our real daughter is alive but brain damaged, and you've created an artificial version that's more like the Emma we remember? Precisely. Which brings us to tonight's decision point. Morrison gestured toward his guards, who moved closer to David and Melissa. You can choose to take home the real Emma, damaged, limited, but genuinely alive. Or you can continue with the artificial Emma, who will provide the emotional satisfaction of the daughter you lost, but with the security of knowing she'll never again be at risk of accident, illness, or death. David stared at the artificial Emma, then at the video of the real one. This is insane! You can't make us choose between a real daughter and a fake one. Actually, I can. You see, the research grants that fund this project require successful family reintegration within 12 months of initial consciousness preservation. Whether you take home the real Emma or the artificial one, my team needs documented evidence that the Sterling family unit has been successfully reconstructed. Morrison's tablet chimed, and he glanced at it with satisfaction. Perfect timing. Mrs. Sterling, the memory extraction team is ready for you. Once we've completed your therapeutic conditioning, you'll find this decision much simpler. The artificial Emma will feel completely real to you, and you'll have no troubling memories of loss or grief to complicate your maternal bonding. You're not touching my wife, David stepped forward, and for the first time in months, Melissa saw her real husband, the man who would fight anyone who threatened his family. I'm afraid this isn't negotiable. Morrison nodded to his guards, who moved to flank Melissa. Federal funding requires completion of all family unit participants. Mrs. Sterling's conditioning is the final step in demonstrating our protocol's viability. That's when Melissa heard the distant sound of sirens approaching the house. Jurnviti. Sarah Thomas had come through. The authorities were already mobilizing based on the evidence Melissa had provided. Morrison heard the sirens too, his calm demeanor cracking for the first time. Unfortunate. It seems we'll need to accelerate our timeline. He pulled a syringe from his coat pocket, moving toward Melissa with sudden urgency. The memory extraction process works much faster with pharmaceutical assistance. David lunged forward, grappling with Morrison as the syringe flew across the room. The two security guards moved to restrain him, but Melissa was already running, not toward the stairs, but toward the artificial Emma. "If you're going to erase my memories anyway," she shouted, "then I'm going to do something you'll never be able to edit out of my mind." She reached the life support equipment and began pulling plugs, shutting down the systems that maintained the artificial consciousness. Morrison screamed in rage, breaking free from David's grip. "You don't understand. That prototype represents $12 million in research and development." "Good," Melissa snarled, hitting the main power switch. "Then you just lost $12 million worth of my daughter's exploitation." The artificial Emma's eyes flickered as her systems shut down, but her final words came through clearly. "Thank you, Mommy. I was so tired of pretending to be alive." The basement plunged into darkness as the life support systems died, but the sirens outside were getting louder. Emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie shadows as federal agents began pounding on the front door upstairs. Morrison was screaming into his phone, demanding extraction protocols, but it was too late. His operation was blown, his prototype destroyed, and his test subjects were about to become witnesses for federal prosecutors. David grabbed Melissa's hand, pulling her toward the hidden door Morrison had emerged from. "The real Emma. We have to find the real Emma." "David, wait," Melissa said, even as she followed him through the door. What if she's not? What if she's too damaged to recognize us?" David turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the man she'd married, scarred by grief but not broken by it, determined to love their daughter regardless of how much she might have changed. "Then we'll learn to love whoever she's become," he said simply, "because she's our Emma, and we don't abandon our family." Together, they ran through Morrison's facility corridors as federal agents swarmed the building, searching for the room where their real daughter waited to come home. Behind them, the artificial Emma's systems completed their shutdown, finally allowing the consciousness trapped within to rest. And somewhere in the facility's medical wing, a 7-year-old girl with Emma's eyes and a damaged but healing brain turned toward the sound of her parents calling her name. "I'm literally crying!" The real Emma has been alive this whole time, and Melissa just destroyed millions of dollars worth of illegal research to save her family. But what condition will they find Emma in? And will David and Melissa be strong enough to love their daughter, no matter how much she's changed? The final part is going to be emotional. Make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss this incredible conclusion. They found Emma in room 247 of Morrison's medical wing, 3 floors above the basement laboratory where her artificial double had been destroyed. Federal agents had already secured the facility, but David and Melissa didn't wait for official permissions. They followed their hearts through corridors lined with other children's rooms, each one a testament to Morrison's exploitation of parental grief. The door to Emma's room stood open, revealing a space that was part hospital room, part child's bedroom. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been painted with cheerful murals, and stuffed animals sat on shelves beside complex medical equipment. In the center of it all, a small figure sat in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at a garden that bloomed with impossible beauty. "Emma?" Melissa whispered. The girl turned slowly, and Melissa's heart broke and healed simultaneously. This was their daughter, unmistakably Emma, with David's dark eyes and Melissa's stubborn chin, but changed in ways that spoke of profound trauma and equally profound resilience. The left side of Emma's face bore surgical scars that hadn't been there before the accident, and when she moved, it was with the careful deliberation of someone relearning basic motor functions. But when she saw her parents, something magnificent happened. Her face lit up with pure, uncomplicated joy. "Mommy! Daddy!" Emma's voice was slightly slurred, her words coming slower than they once had. But the love in them was absolutely real. "You came. Dr. Morrison said you might not want to see me because I'm different now." David dropped to his knees beside the wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. "Baby girl, we've been looking for you for 6 months. We were told you were gone." "I was sleeping for a really long time," Emma said, reaching out to touch David's face with fingers that trembled slightly. "But I dreamed about you both every single night. The dreams were the only good part." Melissa knelt on Emma's other side, gathering her daughter into her arms with infinite care. Emma felt real, warm and solid and alive in a way the artificial version never had. She smelled like hospital soap and children's shampoo, and when she hugged Melissa back, her grip was weaker than before, but absolutely genuine. "Are you really my Emma?" Melissa whispered against her daughter's hair. "I think so," Emma said, with heartbreaking honesty. "I remember most things about before, like how you used to make funny voices when you read stories, and how Daddy sang the lullaby when I had bad dreams. But some things are fuzzy, and some things I know I used to know, but I can't remember anymore." David looked into his daughter's eyes that held wisdom no 7-year-old should possess, and made a choice that would define their family's future. "That's okay, sweetheart. We'll help you remember the important things, and we'll make new memories for everything else." "Really?" Emma's voice carried a vulnerability that the artificial version had never quite managed. "Even though I can't walk as good as before? Even though sometimes I forget words or get confused?" "Especially then," Melissa said fiercely. "Emma, you're our daughter. Not because of what you can do or how smart you are or whether you're exactly the same as before. You're our daughter because we love you, and love doesn't change just because circumstances do." A federal agent appeared in the doorway, a kind-faced woman who introduced herself as Agent Sarah Thomas, the colleague Melissa had called for help. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to get Emma to a proper hospital for evaluation. Dr. Morrison's treatments were unauthorized, to say the least." "Is she going to be okay?" David asked, his hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. Agent Thomas's expression was carefully neutral. "The medical team will need to run comprehensive tests, but preliminary examinations suggest Emma has made remarkable progress considering the extent of her initial injuries. Dr. Gis, Morrison's methods were unethical and illegal, but some of his neural reconstruction techniques appear to have been effective." Over the following weeks, as Emma underwent legitimate medical evaluation, and the family began the slow process of rebuilding their lives, the full scope of Morrison's operation became clear. Dozens of families had been exploited, their grief manipulated to fuel research into artificial consciousness and neural reconstruction technology. David spent months in therapy, working to distinguish between his authentic memories and the artificial constructs Morrison had implanted. Some memories returned easily: the joy of Emma's first steps, the pride of her first day of school, the love that had defined their family. Others were lost forever, casualties of Morrison's psychological manipulation. But new memories took their place: Emma relearning to ride a bike with careful determination, celebrating small victories like tying her shoes or remembering a friend's name. The family discovered that while this Emma was different from the daughter they'd lost in the accident, she was also remarkable in her own right. More patient, more empathetic, blessed with a perspective on life and death that was profound and beautiful. Melissa returned to her trauma counseling practice with a deeper understanding of loss and healing. She specialized in helping families navigate medical trauma, using her own experience to guide others through the impossible choices that serious illness or injury could create. David eventually returned to marriage counseling as well, but with a new focus on helping couples rebuild trust after betrayal or loss. The experience with Morrison had taught him that love alone wasn't enough. Relationships required honesty, even when the truth was painful. 6 months after Emma's rescue, the Turner family stood in their backyard watching the sunset from the tire swing David had rehung from the old oak tree. Emma sat carefully in the swing, her movements still deliberate, but growing stronger every day, while David pushed her gently and Melissa sat nearby reading a book, not about trauma or psychology, but a simple romance novel that reminded her it was okay to believe in happy endings. "Daddy," Emma said as the swing slowed, "do you ever miss the me that I was before?" David caught the swing and knelt in front of his daughter, taking her hands in his. "I miss some things about before, sweetheart. I miss how easily you used to run and jump. I miss some of the words you knew that you're still relearning. But Emma, I don't miss you because you're right here. You're different, but you're still you. Still brave, still curious, still the little girl who makes every day brighter just by being in it." Emma smiled, the expression lighting up her scarred but beautiful face. I don't miss the old me either. She didn't know how precious hugs are or how important it is to tell people you love them every day. I'm glad I'm the me who knows those things. Melissa closed her book and joined her family by the swing, wrapping her arms around both David and Emma. They stood together as the stars began to appear, three people who had been broken apart by tragedy and manipulation, but had chosen to heal together. I love you both so much, Emma said, her words careful but clear. And even when I forget other things, I never forget that. And in that moment, standing in their backyard under a sky full of possibilities, the Turner family knew they had found their way home, not to the life they had lost, but to the life they had chosen to build together. Imperfect, challenging, but absolutely real. And that was enough. That was everything. I'm not crying, you're crying. This story has been an incredible journey through grief, love, and the lengths parents will go to for their children. What did you think of Emma's real condition versus the artificial version? And how beautiful was that ending where they realized the new Emma has wisdom the old one never had? I pour my heart into every story I share with you, so if this one moved you, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which part affected you most. Your engagement means everything to me, and I love reading how these stories touch your hearts. Until next time, remember that love finds a way, even through the darkest circumstances.